Hi. Welcome back to Revenge Rage. My name is Claire Hartman. I'm 32 years old. I work in project management for a logistics company in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have always been the kind of person who plans ahead. Not in a boring way, in the way that comes from watching your single mother clip coupons at the kitchen table and promising yourself you'd never have to do that. Every paycheck I've ever earned has been treated like a small building block. Mortgage fund. Emergency savings. And the one I was most proud of, the down payment account I'd been filling for 3 years, dollar by careful dollar, to buy a house of my own. A real one, with a yard. That was the dream I was protecting when I let my sister and her son move into my 2-bedroom condo. I remember the exact date my sister Dana called me because I'd just come home from a run and was standing in my kitchen eating peanut butter out of the jar like a woman who had no one to answer to. She was crying before she even got through hello. The divorce had finally gone through. Marcus had cleaned out their joint account, what was left of it, after 2 years of fighting, and the apartment she'd been staying in had hiked the rent by $300 a month, effective in 30 days. She had nowhere to go. And her son Brandon had just come home from his second semester of community college because, as she put it, he needed a little stability right now. I looked around my place. 1 bedroom, 1 office I'd converted into a workspace I actually used. The couch was a good one. I told myself it would be temporary. I told myself a lot of things. They arrived on a Saturday with a rented cargo van and more stuff than my condo had ever seen. Dana hugged me for a long time in the parking lot and said she didn't know what she'd do without me. Brandon carried in boxes without making eye contact, dropped them wherever there was space, and immediately claimed the couch as his personal territory by arranging 3 blankets and a pillow on it before he'd even asked where anything went. I told myself that was just how 21-year-olds operated. I told myself a lot of things that month. The first few weeks weren't terrible. Dana helped with groceries sometimes, the way a guest helps a bag of chips here, a box of cereal there. She was applying for jobs, she said, updating her resume, getting her feet under her. Brandon was between semesters and spent most of his time on his laptop or his phone, occasionally venturing into the kitchen to eat everything I'd just restocked and leave the empty containers in the sink. When I asked him about his plans, school, work, anything, he'd give me this slow shrug that seemed specifically designed to end conversations. Still, I was managing. I'd reorganized my budget to absorb the extra utilities, the doubled grocery bill, the way my water heater now ran twice as long every morning. I didn't say anything about it because Dana was stressed and I could see it in her face every day. The weight of starting over at 39. I wanted to give her a real runway. 6 weeks, I'd told myself when they moved in. 2 months at the outside. By month 2, I'd quietly stopped putting money into my down payment account. Not because I couldn't afford to, because every time I went to transfer, there was some new shortfall. A month passed, then another. I stopped looking at how far back the timeline had slipped. The thing about Brandon was that he wasn't cruel or loud about what he was doing. He was just relentless in the way water is relentless. Slowly, steadily, finding every crack. He'd asked to use my Amazon account once to order a charger, and I'd said yes because it was a charger. Then one day I noticed a pair of wireless headphones in his room that I didn't recognize. When I asked, he said he'd used the account again, just this one thing. He'd been meaning to tell me. I talked to Dana about it. She nodded seriously and said she'd have a word with him. The next week, he bought a hoodie. I kept meaning to remove my card from the account. I kept forgetting. I was working long hours on a system migration at the office, coming home tired, eating dinner in front of my laptop, and by the time I thought about it, I'd already moved on to something else that needed my attention. I trusted that Dana had talked to him. I trusted that things were being handled. It was a Tuesday night, close to 11, when I picked up my phone to check that a transfer had cleared before I went to sleep. I opened my bank app the way you open a door in your own house, completely without thinking, completely unprepared for what's on the other side. The transfer was there, but so was everything else. A pair of limited edition sneakers from a boutique online store, a hotel booking for a weekend in Myrtle Beach, a DoorDash charge for $47 placed at 9 in the evening tonight while I'd been in my room on a work call, an order from a gaming accessory site I'd never heard of, a clothing haul from some app I didn't recognize, and going further back, more things I hadn't bought, More numbers that weren't mine. All told, $5,920 gone from the account I'd linked to Amazon a lifetime ago, now apparently linked to everything Brandon had downloaded onto his phone. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time without moving. The number wasn't abstract to me. I knew exactly what $5,920 meant. It was 4 months of the disciplined, boring, quietly hopeful transfers I'd been making toward the only real goal I'd had for myself in years. It was the closest I had come to feeling like the future was actually something I could hold. I went out to the living room. Brandon was on the couch, headphones on the new ones, watching something on his phone with his feet up on my coffee table. He didn't hear me come in. I stood there for a second, just looking at him. Then I went to Dana's door and knocked. She opened it looking half asleep, and I showed her the screen. I didn't raise my voice. I just scrolled through it slowly and let the numbers speak. She squinted at the phone, then looked up at me, and her face did something complicated, guilt and defensiveness fighting for space at the same time. "He's going through a hard time," she said. She said it the way someone says something they've already decided is true before the conversation even starts. "He's still adjusting. The divorce hit him hard too, Claire. You don't see how he is at night. He's struggling." I looked at her. I told her I understood he was struggling. I told her I was sorry about that. And then I told her that struggling didn't cost someone else $6,000 without their knowledge, and that what I was looking at on my phone had a different word than struggle. She flinched when I said it. She told me I was overreacting. She told me we could figure it out in the morning, that it was late, that she was tired, that we'd sit down as a family and sort it out. She told me to just relax for tonight. Then she turned back toward her bed, and before I could say anything else, she pulled the door halfway shut, in that way that isn't quite closing it in your face, but achieves the same result. I stood in the hallway. Down the hall, I could hear the thin, tinny sound of whatever Brandon was watching. I thought about going in there and confronting him directly. I thought about how that conversation would go, the shrugging, the not quite denying, the waiting for it to blow over. I thought about what Dana had just said to me. "He's going through a hard time." I went back to my room, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I have never thrown anything. I have never sent an angry email I didn't delete first. What I am, in the deepest and most functional way, is organized. And for the next 2.5 hours, that is what I was. I started with my bank. I went through every charge I didn't authorize and flagged them, opened disputes, uploaded the screenshots I'd already taken, and noted in the comments that the purchases had been made from my account without my knowledge by someone else in my household. The representative on the chat asked me if I wanted to report it as fraud. I thought about the word for 1 second. Then I said yes. After that, I went into every account that had my payment information stored. Amazon, DoorDash, the rideshare app, 3 or 4 other platforms I barely used, but had apparently been used on my behalf, and removed my card from every single one. Changed passwords. Enabled 2-factor authentication. Logged out all devices that weren't mine. I found the hotel booking and contacted the property directly. Explained I was the card holder and had not made the reservation. They flagged it for review and told me the dispute process through my bank would cover the rest. I found the sneaker site and located the order confirmation that had gone to an email address I didn't recognize, but that had been created using my name with a number at the end, the kind of workaround that isn't even clever, just brazen. I forwarded it to my bank dispute team and kept the screenshots. It was 1:10 in the morning when I finished. The damage wasn't undone that would take time, but every door I could close was closed. Every window was locked. If Brandon reached for his phone right now and tried to order so much as a bottle of water with anything connected to my name, he would get a decline notification. I closed the laptop and lay in bed, looking at the ceiling for a while. The condo was quiet in that particular way. It gets very late at night, all the ambient hum of appliances and street noise settling into something almost peaceful. I thought about the down payment account. I thought about the yard I'd been picturing for 3 years, nothing fancy, just enough room for a chair and some sun. I thought about how Dana had looked at me when I showed her the screen, and how quickly she had turned away. I thought about the phrase she'd used. "He's going through a hard time." I had been going through a hard time too. I just hadn't handed anyone else the bill for it. I woke up before my alarm and lay there for a moment, aware of something unfamiliar. It took me a second to name it. I wasn't anxious. I was steady. Whatever was about to happen this morning, I had already done the part that mattered. I got dressed, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with my phone face down while the sun came in through the window. The first sound was Dana's voice from down the hall, high and confused, saying something about the grocery app. Then Brandon's door. His footsteps had a specific quality when he was annoyed, heavy and deliberate, like the floor had done something to personally inconvenience him. He came into the kitchen in a gray t-shirt, phone in hand, and stopped when he saw me sitting there. "Something's wrong with the accounts," he said. His voice had that particular tone, not quite accusatory yet, but warming up to it. "My DoorDash keeps declining, and Amazon's saying my payment method is invalid." I looked at him over my coffee. "Good morning." He held up his phone like evidence. "I'm serious. Did something happen with your card?" I was about to order breakfast. I set my mug down. "At 1 in the morning, I said, I went through every charge on my bank account that I didn't make. Almost $6,000, Brandon. Sneakers, a hotel room, gaming gear, food delivery, ordered on accounts tied to my card, on platforms that have been logging into my profile from devices in this condo." He stared at me. His jaw moved slightly, like he was deciding which version of this story to open with. Before he could, Dana appeared in the kitchen doorway in her robe, arms crossed, looking back and forth between us. "What's going on?" she asked. I looked at her. I told her I'd handled it last night, removed my card from everything, filed disputes with the bank, flagged the unauthorized charges. I kept my voice the same way I'd kept it at 1 in the morning, quiet and absolutely certain. "You flagged them?" Brandon said. The word landed differently than the others, and I could see it working through him, what that meant. "You told the bank." "I told the bank that charges had been made on my account without my authorization," I said. "Which is accurate." Dana stepped forward. "Okay, just let's not escalate this. We can work this out. You didn't have to go and involve the bank, Claire. That's making it into something it doesn't need to be." "What does it need to be?" I asked. She threw her hands up. "A conversation. A normal family conversation where we figure out what happened and how to fix it. You could have come to me this morning, instead of going behind everyone's backs at midnight." I looked at her for a long moment. "I came to you at 11 o'clock last night," I said. "I showed you the numbers. You told me he was going through a hard time, and you closed your door." The kitchen went quiet. Brandon set his phone on the counter. "Okay, look," he said, and his voice had shifted into something I recognized, the slightly conciliatory tone that means someone has decided to manage you rather than actually reckon with what they've done. "Maybe I used the account a few times without really thinking about it. I was going to pay you back. I just needed some stuff and I didn't have money, and I figured it wasn't a big deal because you have a good job and it was just $5,920, I said. He stopped. I picked up my phone, opened the statement, and turned it so they could both see the numbers. Not just the total. Every line item. The date, the merchant, the amount. I watched Dana's face change as she read down the list. The hotel in Myrtle Beach. A jacket from a brand I'd never heard of that cost $340. DoorDash charges on nights I'd gone to bed early, alone, while they watched TV out here. Brandon looked at the screen, and then looked away first. "I get that things have been hard," I said. "I know the divorce was hard, and I know starting over is hard, and I opened my home because I wanted to help. But I need you to understand what that number means to me. I had been putting money aside for 3 years to buy a house. Not a luxury, a home. A stable place. And that account is now almost $6,000 short because the person I was trying to help decided that my name on a credit card was a resource he could help himself to. That's not fair," Dana said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "He made some bad decisions. That doesn't mean you get to treat us like criminals. Filing a fraud dispute isn't treating you like criminals. It's what you do when someone spends money from your account without asking. The bank has a process for this. I'm using it." Brandon pushed back from the counter. "I don't believe this," he muttered. "You're going to let them investigate me? Over some online orders? That could actually mess up my record." I met his eyes. You're 21 years old. Every choice you make right now is a choice an adult is making. Not a kid, an adult. He looked at me like I'd said something in another language. Dana pulled out a chair and sat down, rubbing her face. Okay. What do you want, Claire? What is this actually about? Is this your way of telling us to leave? It's my way of telling you that things have to change, I said. And yes, if they don't, then you'll need to find somewhere else to go. But I'm not doing this to be cruel. I'm doing it because something serious happened, and the response I got from both of you last night was either a door closing in my face or a shrug. I deserve better than that. Dana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, softly, "We don't have anywhere to go." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm giving you time." I laid it out the same way I'd laid out the bank disputes, clearly, without drama. Effective immediately, no one used anything with my name on it. Not a card, not an account, not a login. If they needed a subscription, they'd need to get their own. If they needed food delivery, they'd need their own payment method. My finances were mine again, as of last night. Second, Brandon needed to get a job. Not talk about getting a job, not consider his options, get one. There were 3 coffee shops within walking distance, a grocery store 2 blocks away, a restaurant supply warehouse across town that I knew was hiring because I'd seen the sign every day for 2 weeks. I wasn't going to tell a 21-year-old what job was beneath him and which wasn't. Work paid. That was the only qualification that mattered right now. Third, and this was the part I'd decided on sometime around 1 in the morning while I was changing passwords, he needed to start paying back what he'd taken. Not all at once. I wasn't expecting a check for $6,000. But something. A number. A timeline. Something that acknowledged that what happened was real and that it had an obligation attached to it. And I gave them 3 weeks. Not because I was being generous, because I'd checked the tenant notice requirements, and 3 weeks was where I landed when I thought about what was fair without being a doormat. Dana looked at me for a long time when I finished. "You've been planning this," she said. I shook my head. "I've been tired," I said. "This isn't a plan. This is just me finally saying out loud what should have been said a month ago." Brandon left the kitchen without a word. Dana sat there for a while longer, arms crossed, jaw working like she was running through a list of things she wanted to say and discarding each one. Eventually, she got up and poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd made, which felt, in its small way, like something. Like at least she'd stopped pretending this wasn't happening. That first week had an almost surreal quality to it. The condo was quieter without the constant background hum of apps ordering things and accounts being accessed. I noticed the grocery bill the first time I went shopping alone. It was less than half what it had been for the past 2 months. I tried not to think about that too hard. Brandon left the apartment a few times in ways that felt purposeful. I didn't ask where he was going. Dana started her job search in earnest. I could hear her on phone calls in the mornings, her voice professional and careful, the way it always got when she was trying to make a good impression. I felt a small flicker of something. Not quite hope, but adjacent to it. On day 6, Brandon came home and told me he'd applied at the grocery store and one of the coffee shops. He said it the way someone says something they expect not to be believed, braced for a reaction. I told him that was good and meant it. He looked mildly confused by the response, like he'd been prepared for something else. Dana landed a phone interview for an administrative position at a medical office. She told me about it at dinner. And for a few minutes she seemed like herself again, the version of my sister who used to make plans and follow them. Before Marcus and the years of slow financial freefall had taken, it felt almost like something that could work. Then, on day 10, I came home to find Brandon on the couch, exactly where he always was, except now with a new hat I didn't recognize, and a cup from a coffee shop that wasn't one of the ones he'd applied to. I asked him how the application follow-ups were going. He shrugged and said the grocery store had wanted someone with experience, and the coffee shop hadn't called back yet. I asked him if he'd applied anywhere else. He said he'd been thinking about it. I went to my room, sat at my desk, and started making a list. The next morning, I put a printed sheet on the kitchen table before I left for work. I didn't lecture. I didn't explain. The sheet had 12 businesses on it, addresses, phone numbers, whether they were currently hiring, and the type of role: retail, food, service, warehouse, delivery. An asterisk next to the ones I knew were actively looking. A note at the bottom that said simply, Today would be a good day. When I got home, the sheet had a coffee ring on it from someone's mug. It had not otherwise been touched. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at it. Dana came in behind me and saw me looking and started to say something about how he'd had a hard day, how he was feeling discouraged, how the job market was brutal right now for young people without a clear direction. I picked up the sheet, folded it, and set it on the counter. I know, I said. I also had a hard day. I have them regularly. So does everyone who pays their bills. She stopped. I'm not going to keep having this conversation, I told her. I said 3 weeks. That was almost 2 weeks ago. I need to see actual movement, Dana. Not plans, not intentions, movement. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. I hear you, she said finally. She said it quietly, and I believed she meant it. And I also knew that meaning it and doing something about it were different enough things that I couldn't let it count. The turning point, when it came, wasn't dramatic. It was a Wednesday afternoon, day 16, and I got a text from my bank letting me know that one of my disputes had been resolved in my favor. Then another. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office and opened the app and watched the numbers come back in pieces. Not everything, but chunk by chunk, the result of those 2 hours at 1 a.m, the screenshots, the documentation, the account of exactly what had happened and when. 3 of the merchants had already processed refunds on their end. The hotel had confirmed the reservation had been made fraudulently and reversed the charge. By the end of that week, I had recovered $4,300. Not everything, but enough to see the floor again, enough to make a transfer into the down payment account for the first time in months, small, careful, but real. I was sitting with that feeling when Dana knocked on my office door that evening. Brandon was right behind her. They both sat down, which wasn't something that had happened before, both of them together, in a way that felt deliberate. Brandon spoke first. He looked at the table while he said it, which I decided to count as something. He said he knew what he'd done was wrong. He said he'd been selfish and stupid, and that he'd told himself it wasn't a big deal because he'd been telling himself a lot of things weren't a big deal for a long time. And this was the first time something had actually had a consequence that reached him. He said he'd gotten hired at the warehouse 2 towns over. Night shift, 3 nights a week. He'd start Friday. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a rough repayment schedule he'd written by hand, clunky and imperfect. $150 a month for as long as it took. At that rate, it would take years. But it was a number. It was his handwriting on a page acknowledging that the debt existed. Dana had gotten the job at the medical office. She started in a week and a half. She handed me a check for her first month's contribution toward utilities, not much, but real. I sat with both of them for a while after that. Not warm exactly, too much had happened for warm, but honest in a way our conversations hadn't been before. Dana said she was sorry for closing the conversation down that first night. She said she'd been afraid, and that when she was afraid, she defaulted to protecting Brandon, even when he didn't deserve it. She said it had taken watching me hold a line to understand that protecting him from consequences wasn't the same thing as helping him. I told her I needed things to actually stay this way, that I loved her, and I'd always love her, but that the version of helping that required me to silently absorb the cost of other people's choices wasn't something I was willing to go back to. She nodded. She understood. They stayed another 6 weeks after that. Brandon worked his night shifts and started looking for a second part-time job. Dana threw herself into the new position with the kind of focus I recognized from when we were younger, before everything had gotten so complicated. They bought their own groceries. They covered their own apps and subscriptions. The condo felt different, not small the way it had before, crowded and depleted, but full in a way that had some give to it. When they finally moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, Dana hugged me in the parking lot the way she had when she arrived, long and tight, but it felt different this time, more equal, less like she was holding on for survival and more like she was grateful in a way that had some self-respect in it. Brandon shook my hand, which surprised me. He said, kind of gruffly, that he was going to keep paying me back. I told him I knew he would. Standing at my window that evening, watching the street settle into its ordinary quiet, I did the math one more time. Between the bank disputes, the refunded charges, and the first 2 installments from Brandon, I'd recovered about $5,200. Not all of it, but close. Close enough that the house felt possible again, just slightly further on the horizon than before. I made a transfer that night into the down payment account. I watched the number change and held it for a moment before I closed the app. The thing no one tells you about being taken advantage of by people you love is that the worst part isn't the money. The money is just the thing that finally makes the problem visible. The worst part is the moment you realize that you have been treating your own stability like it was a renewable resource, something that would replenish no matter how much was drawn from it, something that didn't count as real because it was yours and not theirs. Dana knew how hard I worked. She'd watched me save. She'd watched me plan. And when her son started quietly picking apart the thing I'd built, some part of her had decided that my discomfort was a price worth paying for his comfort. Not out of malice, I don't think it was ever malice. Just out of the particular blindness that comes from needing someone so badly that you stop seeing them clearly. There's a version of this story where I just let it happen. Where I absorbed it the way I'd been absorbing things for months, told myself it was temporary, waited for it to resolve on its own, and woke up 6 months later with nothing in the down payment account and an explanation for why I'd needed to be understanding. I know that version. I almost lived it. What I actually did was get up in the middle of the night and close the doors I'd left open. Not because I stopped loving my sister, because I finally loved myself enough to understand that the two things weren't the same. If you're watching this, and there's someone in your life, family, friend, anyone who has convinced you that your stability is a shared resource they never had to ask permission to use, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to lock the door. You are allowed to change the password. You are allowed to say that your savings, your credit, your name, your future, these are yours. And access to them is something that has to be earned and maintained and respected. Not something that comes automatically with a family connection. The people who love you back will understand that. And if they don't understand it right away, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to let them learn what it costs to find out you meant it.